sir, go ahead.
Hi.
Oh,
I
ma'am, sorry.
have a question for you.
Yes.
Going to keep cutting taxes, how are you going to pay for the government? Taxes supports a large part of the government. And secondly, I thought that the government was by the people and for the people. And the last time I looked, the majority of people were not millionaires. Are you going to take that money away from those millionaires and put it back into the economy? Because they are not using that money that they're getting from the tax breaks to open jobs, because unemployment keeps going up.
Well, a couple of things. If your main goal is wealth redistribution, that's the Barack Obama perspective. My main goal is to grow jobs and grow the economy. And I think that's what 95% of the people depend on, is people need jobs. And so I'm less interested in people who want to get into kind of class warfare rhetoric, and more interested in what are those things we can do to grow the economy. And as I listen carefully, and I travel the country 6 days a week, talk to entrepreneurs and small business leaders all over this country, they say the thing that's causing them concern and causing them hesitation and causing them problems in terms of growing their business and providing more jobs is the fact that the government's hand in taxes and regulation and the like is too heavy and too burdensome, too difficult, too uncertain. Now, I think it's also important to remember how we got into this mess. And if you look at the government spending over the last 10 and 20 years, what you'll see in most levels of government is government spending exceeded by far any growth of the private sector economy. So we didn't get into this mess because our taxes are too low. The tax revenues for the country in most states have kept up with the growth of the economy. We got into this problem because the government in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere went spending way beyond that. And let me give you one measure from Minnesota, but it's reflective of most of the rest of government. From 1960 until I became governor, the average 2-year increase in Minnesota state government spending was 21% every 2 years for 40 years. That is irresponsible, it's reckless, it's unsustainable, and really ridiculous. So then I had people say, well, Governor, you just can't cut spending because we should raise taxes so we can get back to that 21% spending increase. In my view, nonsense. We didn't have a tax problem, other than the taxes were too high. We had a spending problem. And if you look at the federal government, they got the same issue. So I don't support tax increases for that reason, and I also don't think it'll grow jobs in the country. There's a lot of people sitting on a lot of money that they'd like to invest, but they don't have the confidence in the economy because they don't know in the future what the cost of health care is going to do. They don't like the regulatory environment. They don't like the uncertainty regarding the tax environment. And the people who actually do this day in and day out will tell you Obama's taking it in the wrong direction. We'll take it a different direction. Sir.
I enjoy driving my Chevrolet Tahoe, and I think Obama wants us all to drive around with these little tin cans that I see. And his plan to have automobiles averaging 50 miles a gallon by 2020 or something like that numbers came out. And his idea of taxing producers of energy is his way of our energy plan. I was hoping maybe that you would have the backbone to stand up to the tree huggers and tell them to go take a hike, so to speak, and drill where we need to be drilling and build new refineries so that we're not held hostage by the Middle East. What's your,
good
could
point.
you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, first of all, I love it when these federal bureaucrats come out and say, hey, as it relates to inflation, if you don't count energy costs and you don't count food, there really isn't any inflation. I'm like, wait a minute now, I think most people like to drive and most people like to eat, right? So it just shows you how goofy these people are in Washington, D.C. and how they think. But as to energy policy, my policy, like I said, is more American energy and all of the above. So what does that mean, really? It means drilling in ANWR. It means drilling in Alaska more broadly. It means not having moratoriums on deep water drilling, because we do need to learn the lessons of the Gulf spill. But that industry in deep water drilling served us well for 40 or 50 years safely beforehand. We should continue with those efforts. That means having more modern regulations, so even places like California can significantly increase their oil production, and they say they can if they get a few regulatory changes. That means we should take advantage fully of the immense natural gas deposits that we have found in this country in the last 3 to 5 years. There are experts now who say we have enough natural gas within the territorial reach of the United States of America to supply all of our baseload energy needs for 75 and some would say 200 years. It's incredible. We have a 250-year supply of coal in the United States. We should use clean technology, but we should use it. And then we have nuclear. Nuclear is obviously something we have to learn the lessons of Japan, but those plants were 30, 40, 50 years old. The new plants and the new technology that we have is safer and better, and we should advance nuclear. And then finally, renewables, we should do the ones that make sense. Some of them do, some of them don't, but we should use the ones that make sense. And those kinds of things and more will unhook us from places that don't like us or hostile to us, that we can't depend on. I don't know about you, but I don't want to have our energy prices dependent on what some tyrant in the Middle East had for breakfast. Let's unhook our country both from an energy and an economic standpoint from those kinds of places. And you got great points. And I like to drive SUVs and large sedans too. Ma'am.
Just briefly, Iran, Israel, and Mexico.
Thank you. Our question was Iran, Israel, and Mexico. And if you have the time and you're interested in foreign policy more broadly, I gave a speech, again, the most detailed speech of any candidate in the race on foreign policy at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York a few weeks ago. And it's all on our website, again, at timpawlenty.com. By the way, we also have a new website at pawlentyfaith.com, which is dedicated just to the faith perspective that Mary and I have and how that informs our thinking in public policy. So I hope you'll check that out as well. But as to Israel, Iran, and Mexico, we should have a no daylight between us and Israel. Israel is one of our best friends in the world. They share our values. We should stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. There should be no daylight between us and them. And now we have a president who repeatedly and intentionally sticks his thumb in the eye of Israel. And it not only undermines our friendship with Israel, it undermines their security position, and it undermines our own security interests. And in the Middle East and elsewhere, when you're dealing with thugs and bullies, they understand strength. And if they perceive weakness, tardiness, equivocation, or daylight between us and Israel, it invites danger. So we should make sure that the world understands that we stand with Israel. As to Iran, we can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
Oh, no.
We have Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who is the head of that country. You can take him at his word. He said he stands for the annihilation of Israel. I believe if they get a nuclear weapon, they will use it. And if they do, we will have a very different world on our hands. And so we better be vigilant and clear-eyed about the danger that that presents and make sure we do everything we plausibly can to deny them that capability. And as to Mexico, it's really interesting that you raised that question because so much of the attention is focused on the Middle East, and appropriately so, for all the reasons we just talked about. But there's a lot of trouble brewing in Mexico, and they are right on our border. And it has a lot to do, as you know, with criminal gangs as it relates to drug gangs and the like. And the situation there is very concerning. And so I think we should do what we can to help Mexico in terms of technology or enforcement or resources to try to stabilize and confront that threat to Mexico. It is not in our best interest to have a destabilized or corrupt or dangerous Mexico. They are right on our border, obviously. And that's really a percolating issue that most people don't ask about. They always ask about the Middle East, so it's really a great perspective that you've raised, and it's one that we need to stay engaged with. Sir?
What's your thoughts on illegal immigration and how to solve the problem we got?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Illegal immigration, again, on all this stuff, everybody's going to say stuff. I've actually done it. So when President Bush asked the governors, who will volunteer to send the military, your National Guard, to the border to reinforce the border? Only a few did. I did. Operation Jumpstart, the Arizona border. We need to enforce the border, not just from an immigration standpoint, but from a security standpoint.
Amen.
That means more infrared, that means more drones, that means more border patrol, that means fences and barriers, and that means, if need be, military resources and assets appropriately deployed to get that border as secure as possible. And when people say you can't do it, yes, you can.
Yeah.
The results show that, while it may not be perfect, those kinds of reinforcements make a big positive difference. We should pursue it aggressively, and I've actually done it. Number two, Why do you think most people come here illegally? What are the reasons?
Jobs.
Jobs and public benefits sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So we need to shut off the magnet as to why they come by making sure that if you're here illegally, you can't access those things. And right now, the systems in that regard are broken. So what can we do? Ma'am, what's your name? Lita. So let's pretend Lita's an employer and I want a job from Lita. I come to Lita currently now and I say, Lita, I'd like the job, and she brings out an I-9 form. And I bring out some documents. Lita checks that I gave her, say, a Guatemalan birth certificate or a Honduran passport. She photocopies my documents. Lita puts them in her file. She's met her legal obligation. I seemingly have met mine. What do we know about that? Well, we know that system is a 1950s paper-based system that's filled with fraud.
Oh, yeah.
And we can do a lot better. So when I was governor, again, not rhetoric, but results, I issued an executive order that required anybody who wants to do business with the state, anybody who wants to be hired by the state, anybody who's a subcontractor of anybody who does business with the state, to use what's called E-Verify.
Yep.
It's an instant, quick, pretty non-burdensome check. It can be better. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than this old paper-based system. So we want to know, who are you? Are you here legally? And are you entitled to employment? And if you're able to shut off that magnet as it relates to people who are not legally entitled to be here or employment, you're going to dry up most of the problem. The same with public benefits. You know, most states have laws that say unless you're a pregnant woman, you're not entitled to public benefits, welfare, social services, and the like. Except, guess what? Nobody checks. Nobody checks. And the same kind of verification system should be applied to public benefits. And then lastly, let's also end on a positive note. Let's celebrate legal immigration.
Yeah.
And unless you are here as a Native American, everybody in this room is either an immigrant or a descendant of an immigrant. So we welcome that, but it has to be legal and reasonable and orderly. We're a nation based on the rule of law. And you can't have this many people knowingly, openly violating the law and looking the other way or thumbing their nose at the law. It is not just an immigration issue, it's a issue as it relates to one of the pillars of our society, which is we're a rule of law society. And if the rule is anything goes, pretty soon it does. And if you don't believe me, just go back and look at some of the tapes from pre-Giuliani New York. Okay? Things got out of hand, and you can't allow that to happen. I guess we're getting one more. We're assigned for one more, sir.
Yes, I just recently saw 1776, in which most of the congressmen and the people who were in that congregation or group lost all of their property before they died or were killed in doing so, for doing so. Now, are you willing to go that far with the Congress of our United States, which are far and away overpaid as far as I'm concerned?
Yeah.
I think the government would do much better if we had term limits for the congressmen and no pensions after they leave office. To hell with them. Let them go. I mean, how many of us are having to decide what we're going to do based on the Congress that are being overpaid now?
Sure. Well, first of all, I was the chief author of legislation in Minnesota when I was in the legislature for term limits. The then Democrat legislature didn't pass it, but I've been a strong and steady and consistent supporter of it, and I think it works. If you go to the states that have it in a reasonable form, I think they're very satisfied with it, and it has the intended effects of your question. Number two, in terms of taking a hit, you're looking at somebody who had the first government shutdown in 150 years in Minnesota. People looked at me in the summer of 2005 and they said, stick a fork in him, he's done. My popularity ratings went from mid-50s to mid-30s in a week or two. And they said, you know, he's done. Next year I got reelected, by the way, in a very tough year in a very tough state as a Republican. And I set a record for vetoes. I unallotted more money out of the budget than all the other governors combined. So I think I've demonstrated my mettle. And then I've given up a fair amount in public service compared to what my other options were. But I do it because I believe in this process and I believe in the fact that the country's in trouble and I need to do what I can to fix it. You know, Mary and I had a discussion when I came home last year. I said, I've been governor 8 years, making less money, in most of the time I was governor than I did in the mid-90s when I was in private practice, in real terms, not adjusted for inflation. And I said, look, we've done what we can. We had a lot of battles here, got some battle scars. Maybe it's time to move on. But we both decided we need to do what we can to fight and get this country back on track. I'd be making a lot more money doing something else.
That's
It
interesting.
ain't about the money.
That's interesting and encouraging, because the Salvation Army officer of the United States gets 0 salary.
Yeah,
It's all volunteer.
absolutely.
The Veterans of Foreign Affairs and VFW that works with the veterans here also gets very little salary. While UNICEF president and some of those folk get up into the millions plus free benefits of anything they want, along with the president and the president's wife, I would say, of the United States. Now, I don't enjoy that kind of thing, and I'm not sure that we should give all of the benefits that the president has to everybody else in the country who happens to be friends to the wife of the president. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it would benefit the country greatly if we did a number of things. One is have term limits. Have the idea of serving in Congress be a temporary thing, and you can set the number of years, but I think that makes great sense. Number two, I don't believe anymore that we could send politicians to Washington, D.C., and that over time they'll do the right thing as it relates to spending and deficits and debt. So I think we got to put some guardrails and some rules up in front of them. And I would start, by the way, with a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. That's the only way we're going to get this thing, I think, solved for the long haul. And I would peg spending to a percent of GDP. And as this debt limit vote, that's what I've called for. Cut, cap, and balance, constitutional amendment, peg spending to GDP, and do the cuts in the meantime. But we're going to need reform. But I don't believe that people are just going to Washington, D.C. as politicians over time have demonstrated that we can just trust them to get this thing fixed. We got to put up some rules, and we got to put up some guardrails. And I think a constitutional amendment and term limits would help. You know, we got to go. I guess we're going to go. So you're going to wrap up, and
Yes, sir.
thank you so much for being our leader in the county. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, you're welcome. I've had people ask me when I was going to pick a candidate, and I have picked Governor Pawlenty. I picked him for a few reasons. He is a strong leader. He's a humble man. He really is a public servant. And I got to tell you, I've done politics for 40 years. And there's a difference between political people that are just working up the ladder and real leadership with humility, and people who know how to stand in the gap and take those big hits. Because this job is not an easy job when you're pushing for the right stuff. So thank you very much. Here's what we're doing. We're going to ask you to fill out some things, something for the straw poll, to say that if you're going to go to the straw poll and vote for Governor Pawlenty, I'd like you to fill this out. The reason I have it now is because it's easier to fill it out as we sit, as opposed to standing at the door waiting. So if y'all can just kind of divvy these up and pass them on back. The guys have pens, right, Michael? You can bring up pens if we need them. The straw poll is a big deal, and here's why it's a big deal. This shows the support that any campaign has coming out of the chute. And we want to give Governor Pawlenty, all of our support. There are thousands of votes that are needed in order to win the straw poll. The straw poll then just kind of catapults him through the caucus. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to have buses that are leaving from Warren County. They're air conditioned. We can come back as people need to. My husband and I will be happy to drive you back. If you want to just go for part of the day, we'll drive you back. So whatever's needed, whatever your circumstances are, but we'd like you to go up there and vote. The tickets are free. There's Famous Dave barbecue, which everybody loves. So, so go have lunch. You're going to have a band and just a lot of fun. And it really is fun. Have y'all been to a straw poll? Oh, it's a blast. It's like a big party all day. So, so we'd love to have you come and vote for Governor Pawlenty. And if you have any questions, Steve and I clearly are working together here. So talk to us. I'm sure everybody knows who one of us is, at least. And thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, Alex, can I?
Right? Well,
September 13th.
I